Welcome to module number 11. Today we're going to be talking about menswear. So we're in chapter 23. So if you want to go to chapter 23, just a couple things to look at as we start. Go to page 493 because we're going to be looking at a few things on that page. Specifically the difference between a young male versus a mature male, according to this book. And I don't necessarily love the differences that they've put in here. It makes you feel like the minute you stop being a young male, you suddenly become this mature male that's like 3 or 4 inches shorter and fat. And I don't really like that. So, I mean, they are all based on measurements that sort of exist in the world, but anyhow, so 493, you see the difference at the bottom between what they consider a young male and an old male. And I don't necessarily think it's accurate, but because of that, they give you 2 different measurement charts to go by. And one of the measurement charts is just shorter than the other one, and basically if you go, so 493 has a picture of the 2 standing next to each other, and then it goes through a whole bunch of different measurements of how to take measurements for the male. So guys, if you want to take measurements for yourself, here's the pages you're going to use to do that. Ladies, if you're taking them off of like your boyfriend or husband or whatever, here's the pages you'll use to take measurements. I will be using the Young Men's Measurement Chart on page 497. I will be using 42. Size 42 is basically my size. So according to this measurement chart, I would basically be a large, according to this measurement chart. And I chose 42 because this shoulder slope on the front basically matches my length. So this height-wise matches me, and the circumference, it matches me as well at a 42. The waist is a little bit narrower than mine. I'm a little bit more rectangle than what they have here. If you go to 498, you'll find another measurement chart, which is the mature male measurement chart. And you'll notice that a chest of 42 sits underneath a 40, a size 40. So basically they've taken all the measurements and they're off one size and they're shorter. So take your pick on which chart you want to use if you're going to go by the chart. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to be using a size 42 on the Young Men's Measurement Chart on 497. So guys, if you don't want to take up a whole bunch of measurements, but you want to kind of have something that's sized for you, take a couple of key points and then compare them to the chart, figure out which size you fit on, and go according to that one. So once you have determined which size you want, I have another one of these papers uploaded to Canvas that goes through all the measurements in the order that I used them to create your block for the men's torso. And the men's torso is different than the women's. The men's block is different than the women's in that, number one, we don't have any darts that we have to deal with. Number two, I mean, you can introduce a dart here or there, just like at the back, or there's a couple places you can introduce a dart, but for the most part, we don't. And it goes longer. So women, the block ends at the waist. The men's, we take the waist into account, but then we drop it lower because there's nothing in menswear that we design that stops at our waist. Our waist is up here, but we don't ever have shirts that end up there. We don't do high-waisted pants. We don't do, like, that just doesn't show up in menswear. I mean, I guess if you want to introduce it to menswear, you certainly can. But we don't typically do that. We extend this torso, this block that we're making for the top of the men, we extend it all the way down to the hip or the seat. So once you have determined which size you want to use, then we're going to go to page 522, and that's where we're gonna start, and I'm roughly basing this development on those pages, roughly. I'll do it a little bit different. I encourage you to use my method. Their method's fine, but I'll show you a method that's a little bit more simplified and still works great. Pages 499, starting right after this, through 508, they introduce another block that I'm not going to have you be making, but they introduce your jacket block. It's just drafting the men's jacket foundation. It's a good block to have. We don't really have time this semester to go over it in detail, but if you want a jacket, I just want to point at it, it's here. So if you want to develop a jacket for yourself, guys, it's here. Women, there is a jacket foundation for you as well. It's not in this chapter. I think it's in the chapter after this. So there is a foundation for the women's jacket as well. You can use all of the foundations that we've already created in the torso slippers. You can use all of those that we've already developed to create a jacket foundation. But if you want to draft one from scratch that's specifically used for jackets, there's 2 spots in this book that you can do that. They're great, and it introduces a new sleeve. It's that 2-piece sleeve. You can get to the 2-piece sleeve with the jacket foundation, with the foundations that we've given you, with that the sleeve that has a dart on it. You can get there using all of those patterns. So don't feel like, oh man, I have to develop another block. Well, you don't have to. You technically could get there using the pattern blocks that you already have. But there are other blocks that you can create that are in this book. So I'm just saying, jackets, if you want to do it for later this year, just for funsies, or if you want for your capstone project to do a jacket, come back to this book. It's got the information for you, and it's pretty straightforward. The other great thing about this book is, at least for the men's section and the women's section, the women's section, they have a construction section for those jackets as well, but the men's construction for jackets happens in this chapter as well. And it's 509 to 521. They show you how to construct the jacket. So 499 to 508, they show you how to draft your basic jacket. And then for 509 to 521, they actually show you how to construct the jacket as well. So it's pretty thorough as far as, hey, I want a jacket, what should I do? It's right there. So in the future, don't be like, man, where am I going to look? It's here in this pattern making book. So come back to this book and you'll see it. The other book I want to have you look at, if you ever wanted to do jackets in the future, is this guy right here. The Classic Guide to Sewing the Perfect Jacket, Tailoring. It's a pretty good book. This is the one I learned how to tailor suit jackets back when I learned forever ago. This is the one that I used. So, and it's pretty good. It's a darn good book. You will notice that some of the pictures look like they came straight from the 80s. That's fine. The techniques are still good. So, if you want a reference book, this is a good one to have on hand. So I'm going to bring you down, and I am going to make the basic block for the men. When it comes to the sleeve, go back to Module 8. Men, you can use the same technique to create your sleeve. You can use the same technique to form your sleeve as we used in Module 8. So take a look at that. Or if you guys want to develop a 2-piece sleeve, it shows up in this chapter. Just zoom down through. It'll probably be around page 500 is where the sleeve probably is. Let me just zoom forward and I can look really quick and I can tell you. Oh, right. Yep, 501 is where they start showing how to create a 2-piece sleeve. So this is a good thing to check out as well. Cool. Once you are done with this block, the other thing that I will be including in this video, which you don't have an assignment on, I'm just going to show you how to do it because it's a great skill to have, is how to rub something off. So first I'm going to show you the men's block, and then you can take that and slash and spread and add fullness, add button bands, add finishes, add collars, add cuffs, add plackets, add whatever you want to do. Make a jacket, whatever you want to do. You've got 4 of them, all finishes included, to create for me, all pattern pieces included, for the menswear, just for the top, not for like pants. We'll do pants next week. Well, not next week, but for module 12. But I just want to point out, everything that you have learned up to this point for women's wear, you can use for menswear. We don't introduce fullness differently for a men's pattern versus a women's pattern. It's the technique of slashing and spreading it open, pivoting it, all that kind of stuff, all shows up in menswear just the way that you learned it for women's wear. Sometimes in the industry, people will be like, what are you focusing on? What's your focus? And they want to see, you say, well, I focus on women's wear. Well, I focus on menswear. Ultimately, as a pattern maker, the techniques are the same. We might use different base ASTM measurements, or some of that stuff might be different, but for the most part, the techniques we use to create the collar, the techniques that we use to make it a lower sleeve cap, the techniques that we use for all of that, they are all the same. So just because we've gone into menswear this week, don't think, well, gosh, David's not showing us anything special for menswear. Well, I'm showing you the blog, but that's the only thing that's different. Everything else is the same technique. You just come up with a design and apply it to a men's pattern versus a women's pattern. Doesn't matter at the end. It's all the same technique. So have fun, create some cool stuff for menswear this week. Don't be sketching a girl this week. This is menswear. So even if you want it to be unisex, great, but put it on a men's form when you give me your sketches associated with this. Got my measurements, and I've got 2 pieces of paper. Notice that they're extra long. I'm going to need them to be extra long for this because it's almost the length of a torso. It comes down to the seat, so I'm not going to be able to fit it on 1 page. I have to fit it on 2 sheets of paper, so I've taped them together. Guys, just get a really big piece of paper because you're going to need for your full-size one a lot. So I've got 2. I've got a long line drawn along one side of the paper, and we are going to be developing the right side of the body. So I've got my line on the side far away from me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with measurement number 4, which is my full length, and that's high point shoulder down to the waist. That's important. We'll design everything to the waist, and then we're going to add on the rest of the pattern all the way down to the hip, to the seat. So I am going to develop my full length, which is high point shoulder down to the waist, and I'm going to mark my waist, and I'm going to mark the level of high point shoulder. Just like that. So here's my waist, here's high point shoulder, and then from the waist I'm going to take measurement number 5, which is my center length, and I'm going to take that up and make that mark as well. So I've got 3 lines that I've developed. The waist. Here's where my neck starts at center front, and here is my high point shoulder. And then I'm just going to take my square, and I'm going to square out at all of those lines. Not all of those lines, the waistline and the high point shoulder. So here's my HPS line. Here's my waist, which basically means that's my belly button. Okay. Once I have those, I'm going to get the across shoulder length. And this measurement is going to start at center front on the HPS line and come out. And wherever that comes out, I'm going to make a mark. And from that mark, I'm going to square a line down at least like 3 inches. Just like that. Once I've squared down, I'm going to take my shoulder slope front, which is that measurement that comes from the waist at center front at a diagonal, and wherever it crosses this line that I've just squared down, that's where my shoulder point is going to be. So my shoulder slope has me mark a point right there. Notice I didn't draw the diagonal line. This time I don't have to find a bust point, so I can just mark it right here. I don't need that extra diagonal line. And then we're going to go from this and we're going to create that diagonal slope to figure out where my shoulder, my actual HPS is going to be. So my shoulder length, I am wherever it crosses that line. There it does, and I'm going to take a line, and I'm actually going to extend it beyond my cross shoulder line here. Notice how it's sticking out. Because this length from here to here is my shoulder length, but then I am going to extend beyond that point out along this line an additional ½ inch. So my shoulder length will ultimately be ½ inch longer than my body measurement. Okay? I can finish my neckline out now. I'm just going to square down along my shoulder line. And then I'm going to square over at my center front neckline. I'm going to get my curve. And I've got my neckline. Just like that. Squaring it down made sure that this angle right there is 90 degrees. Now I also need to square down a little bit from my new shoulder point, that point that's ½ inch beyond out here. I need to square down from there as well. Great. Once those are all in place, we can move on and come down to finish up the waist and the underarm. So first things first, I'm going to take a measurement from the HPS line to the waistline. I'm going to figure out what that measurement is, and I'm going to divide it in half. And that happens to be right here. So from here to here, find that number, divide it in half, and make a mark at that point. And this point right here, we will square out to find our underarm. Just like that. So from center front here, we're going to measure out along this line, and we're going to look at our number 1 measurement. So you're going to take measurement number 1, and you have to do some math to it, because right now, if it's 42 inches, for example, we'll take that. Then let me grab a piece of paper and just step through what I have to do. If my chest measurement is 42 inches, This represents all the way around my body. I'm only creating right now a quarter of that because I'm only doing the front, so that takes it down to half this measurement, and then I'm only doing half of the front, so I'm taking half of that too. So I take my 42 and I divide it by 4. And 42 divided by 4 is 10.5 inches. So this is only if I've got a 42. If I've got a 36-inch chest, it'd be 9 inches. So this number right here is all dependent on what your chest measurement is. And that's your chest measurement without ease, without anything. So go ahead and divide that by 4. And then we're going to add our ease now. So 10.5 inches. For men's wear, we add more ease. Men don't like clothing as tightly fitted as women do. So we need to add ease to this. So to this number, I am going to add a full inch. So my final number is 11.5. Whatever number this is, just add an inch to it. That will end up giving us 4 inches of ease around the chest. And that is kind of ideal for a men's basic block, is 4 extra inches of ease. If you want to use it for a t-shirt, then maybe you might make it a little bit less if you want it to be more form-fitting, but honestly, this is a good number to start with. So I'm going to take this number, and from my center front, I'm going to measure out along this line that dimension. So let me make sure I'm using the right number since I'm dividing everything in half. So I've got my mark right there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to my waist. And I'm going to do some interesting math on this as well. So let's come back to my piece of paper. The waist measurement that I am starting with is 35 inches. Well, I need to divide that by 4 because I'm only dealing with a quarter of the body. So when I divide that by 4, I get 8 3/4 of an inch. And then for this measurement, instead of adding a full inch, I'm going to actually add 1.5 inches. If, guys, you do want to just have a really, really tight fitted top, you could go to the same ease measurements that we used for the ladies. So 1/2 inch at the bust, at the chest measurement, and 1/4 inch for the waist. But I have a feeling this is going to be a better measurement for you to start with. So 8 3/4 plus 1.5 inches. And that makes my final measurement here 10 1/4. And I'm going to come out at my waist level and come from center front out that measurement. And I can just connect those lines. I would, if you add that 1.5 inch and your waist measurement ends up out here, it ends up being a bigger dimension than your chest measurement, I would just go with my chest measurement and I would just make it perfectly straight down. I wouldn't make it bulge out this direction. So this is only that 1.5 inch. Basically add it until it could potentially equal the chest measurement, but don't make it bigger than the chest measurement. We do want it to angle in this way or be perfectly straight down. Once we've got that on the chest measurement, we need to figure out how to complete the rest of our armhole. So to complete the rest of our armhole, we're going to take a point that sits 4 inches lower than our neck at center front. So this point here, go down 4 inches, and you're going to square across from that point at 4 inches. 4 inches down from here, square a line across. And on that line, you are going to use measurement number 9, which is your across chest front. And this measurement, we also need to add some ease to. And you're going to add 1/4 inch of ease. So if your across chest front was 8 1/8, the measurement I would use here is 8 3/8 because I added 1/4 inch to it. So whatever your number is, add 1/4 inch to it, and that's where you want it to sit. And you're just going to square a line a little bit up and a little below that mark. Just like that. Square from the armhole, from the underarm at that side seam. Just a little bit right there. And then get your curve. And you're going to connect this line that's coming down from the shoulder. Keep on squaring down. Basically square down until you hit that line. And you're going to connect that line. Don't go past your across front line. You're going to blend between all 3 of those. So notice it comes from this line, blends to this line, and then blends down onto the line that I squared up. Okay, so now we're back to the top is developed from the waist up. So if you wanted to develop something, you know, for Coachella or something like that that ends at the waist, by all means just use this. However, we do want to develop it down to the seat. So what we're going to do is go from the waistline, and we're going to go down the seat depth. So measurement number 12, we're going down from here, that dimension. And from this line, you're going to square something over. Just like that. This is basically your hip, is where this is. It's your seat, your hip, here's your waist. And you're going to use measurement number 3, but it ultimately should be about exactly the same measurement that you took for your chest. So measurement number 1. If you use whatever you used up here, down here, you should be just fine. However, if you know that you've got a larger bum, you might want to actually use a different measurement. So you need to do that same sort of technique of divide that full hip measurement by 4 and then add an inch to get this number as well. Once you have that measurement, we're going to go from the waist and connect those as well. Grab your curve, and we don't want our waist to be this sharp and pointy. So just grab a curve and blend between the 2 of them. Between the 2 lines. That will add width at my waist, and that's okay. The other thing that I'm going to do, just to make everything be smooth, I want this to be a square angle right here, and it's currently acute. I don't want that. So I'm going to drop down a 1/2 inch at center front, and I'm going to come up a 1/2 inch at the side seam, right here. And I'm going to square down from my side seam and square over from my center front, like that. And then I'm just going to blend between the two of them. And that's going to be my new line. I am done with the front. So now, before you erase any of these lines, I would go ahead and finish the back, because you might need to access some of these lines. So leave it as is and go ahead and start the back. So starting the back, I've got my center back line here. And just like with the front, I'm going to use my full length, which is different on the back than it is on the front. So make sure you check the difference between the front and the back measurement for your full length here. It will be longer, most likely. Unless you take your own measurements and you find it to be different, it will probably be longer. So here's my waist, and here's my HPS line. And then the other one I need to make sure I get is also that center length, which will also be longer. And I'm measuring that up from the waist. And then I'm going to take my square and square over at the waist, and square over at the HPS line. And this is now where you're going to need to reference your front. The measurement between the center front at the HPS and your actual HPS on the front, measure that. This measurement we will use for the back. So mine is this dimension, and I'm going to take that exact same dimension and put it here. This is my HPS point for the back. The other thing that I'm going to do is come to my front, and I'm going to measure from the HPS line down to that original shoulder point, not the one that was extended. I'm measuring from here down to here. This is the distance that I'm measuring. That's what I want. And you're going to take that measurement, just create a parallel line to your HPS line, like that. And now you get to use your shoulder length. It's the same shoulder length that you had on the front before you added that 1/2 inch. So you're going to take that. There's that original shoulder length. And then I am going to extend that line again and add that 1/2 inch on. So the final measurement from here to here should be the same as the front. So I've got the shoulder drop. I can actually finish the neckline now. I'm going to square down along the shoulder line from HPS. I'm going to square over from center back here. I'm going to grab my curve and give myself my neckline. Now I get to come down to my chest. Now the chest measurement, I also need to reference my front because I need this point here to be at the same level. So I'm going to come over here to my center front and I'm going to measure from the waist up to this chest level. I can't just divide I just can't divide it in half on the back like I did on the front because the distance from the waist to the HPS is longer here. So if I divide that in half, it's going to put my chest level at a different height than the front. So I need to make sure that I have that same height for the chest coming up from the waist. So measure from the waist up to that chest. Go ahead and give that a good measure. So this distance here matches the one on the front. Then I'm going to square over. And the width will actually be the same as the measurement from the front as well. So there's my chest width. The waist measurement will also be the same as the one on the front. With all of that ease added that we did. Okay, so you can connect those lines if you want. Now we need to finish our armhole. This is different than the front. What we're going to do is we're going to square up from that chest line. And this is why I still wanted us to find the original shoulder point here. We're going to go through this point here, not the half an inch farther on. We're going to go through that point here. So we're going to square up from our chest level like that. And then we're going to measure that line from that shoulder level down to the chest level. We're going to take that measurement and we're going to divide it by 3. And mine ends up being about 1.5 inches. Yours, that's at half size, remember. So I'm coming up 1/3 of the way. So if I were to divide this line in thirds, this bottom third here, I'm making a mark. Next, I'm going to square down from my extended shoulder point out here. I'm going to extend a line that's square down until I hit that line. And I'm also going to take my side seam, square a line over from there as well. And now I can grab my curve. And you might end up doing this in 2 goes. You're not going to be able to do the full shoulder, the full back arm side with 1 go. I mean, you might be able to. I can't. And I'm going to blend this top section. Oops. I just blended this top section from here to here. And I'm going to take my curve and I'm going to blend the bottom section between that point that I just made 1/3 of the way up and the underarm. So you'll notice on the back arm side, it's a lot flatter through here, and you want that. Just like that. In the book, she's like, measure up 1 1/8 inches from I don't like that. I prefer just to be able to make sure that you hit this point and this point, and it blends nicely between those two onto their lines. That is the back arm side. Now we just need to finish the bottom, so get your seat depth. It'll be the same as it was on the front. Extend that down from the waist. Square over. Get your hip measurement, which will probably be the same as the chest measurement. Extend that down. We're going to do the same thing we did to the front. We're going to take this up a 1/2 inch at the side seam and down a 1/2 inch at center back. Square some lines over and down. And use your curve to blend everything nicely. And then also use your curve to blend that side seam. Should be the exact same curve that you used on the front. Just like that. So that this curve on the front matches the curve on the back. And there you have it. There is the men's block. The sleeve, do it the exact same way you did it on the front. I mean, do it the exact same way you did it for Module 8 on the women's block. Go ahead, and I am not expecting for this assignment for you to make a muslin. If you want to make sure that it fits you perfectly, guys, do go ahead and make a muslin and make sure that's perfect for you. Especially if you're planning on using this for your final. We can definitely fit it for you. Make sure you get that in before Thanksgiving if you want me to help you with it, with that fitting. Go ahead and add your 1/2 inch seam allowances everywhere. 1/4 inch seam allowances on the neckline. I realize in half size I've actually technically just added a full inch. So, yeah. But yeah, I would take this, cut it out. If you're just planning on transferring this directly over to a hard pattern paper, then you don't need to add seam allowance. If you're planning on fitting this, I would add seam allowance now, cut it out of muslin, make sure all of the tweaks and everything fits the way that you want it to, and then go ahead and after you've tweaked everything, then transfer it to hard paper. But if you're just going to use this as is for half size patterns for this assignment, then you don't actually have to do that. Anyhow, there you go. It's all set. Hope you have fun with it. All right, I'm going to show you how to rub something off really quick. So this will work for pants, it'll work for, basically this will work for anything. And the biggest concept behind this is that you have to focus in on individual pattern pieces that you know are there. And even if everything else is wrinkly on your garment, make sure that the pattern piece you're trying to extract from your garment is perfectly flat. So I'm going to show you, really I'm just going to show you this with a pair of pants. You should be able to do this a t-shirt as well, with a button down, basically anything. So I'm going to show you the concept. If you want to, I'll bring you down and then I'll explain some more. I've got a pair of pants here, and you can see here is my entire seam line for this front piece. Notice all of this stuff is wrinkled and off to the side, and just that's fine. All that's important is that this piece right here is perfectly flat. The waistband is a big rectangle. So I'm not gonna, when I rub this piece off, I'm not gonna worry about the waistband. I'll create that using measurements later. Same thing with any of the fly facing, the button fly, I mean not button fly, this fly zipper, this facing here, I'll create that piece later. I'll create this piece, the fly guard, later. I'll do all of those by hand. The biggest thing with rubbing something off is to get the main pieces that you want out of it, and then you can come back later and extract all of the other pattern pieces like the pocket facings and all of this later, like we did in the module on finishes. So module number 9, you can do all of that without rubbing it off the garment. So for this, I just need my spur, my tracing wheel, and I've got it on top of a big piece of paper. Make sure you're over something, you're okay. So I've got my protective board. I don't want to put holes all over in my table. If the seam line is exactly on the edge, I can just trace it with a pencil. But most of the time our seam lines are going to be someplace in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this wheel, make sure that my pattern piece is perfectly flat, and I'm just going to run it along my pattern piece. And I'm going to push down hard enough to know that those little holes are going through onto the paper. So if you've got a garment that pen marks, like right here, I'm just marking both ends because I know I'm ultimately going to make that a straight line. So I'm not going to trace the whole thing. But these ones that have curves to them, I'm going to trace all of those. I'll probably come in here and I will trace the shape of this. If this shape here is really important to me, I'll trace it. I'll only trace one of them because I know they're a 1/4 inch apart. If these lines are important to me, I'll trace those. If the shape of the pocket opening is important to me, I'll trace that as well. On the back, if I were to trace this, notice that it's got, when I'm seeing this edge here, this edge is on a fold. So what I would do for that is I would trace all of this, make sure that this is perfectly straight, and I'd pin it, and I'd come back later and I'd trace the other side. And then I'd tape them together, or I'd trace it onto the part that it belongs to here. So I would mark where it's going to be, and I'd flip it over, and I'd finish tracing it here as well. So it's okay for you to flip your garment as well. With yokes, oftentimes there's shape built into the yoke. So for here, I'd make sure that this piece was perfectly flat, and notice that the yoke is kind of bunching up here. That doesn't matter because I'm paying attention to the part of the pant that is down here. The minute I want to trace off the yoke, I'm going to make sure that the yoke is perfectly flat, and then everything else around it can be really wrinkly, and it doesn't matter because all I'm trying to do is make sure that I extract the yoke pattern piece. That is the general idea of snagging pattern pieces and patterns from something else, is just make sure whatever piece you're working on is laying perfectly flat and trace it. If you want to, you could always just grab a ruler and you could just measure the heck out of it. So you could measure here and here and here, like make a whole bunch of measurements and then draft it. That just takes a long time, and I don't really like doing it, so I don't. Once you have done the wheel, all you need to do after that is come back in and find where all your tracing lines are. If it looks like it's supposed to be a straight line, just make it straight. Because there's a lot of times in this situation where the sewing could have gotten off. So if it looks like it should be straight, make it straight. If there's just a slight curve, use your Variform curves. And even if it's just off by 1/16th here and there, just find the curve that fits it best. Any line that looks like it should be straight, that should be straight, that should be straight, this should be curved. I'm going to give myself my grain line. I'm going to base that on my hem. Sometimes you can see the grain line because of the fabric grain, and you can draw your grain line as you're rubbing it off. There is that stitch line. There's the other stitch line. So that'll give me the information for creating my fly front facing and my fly guard later. Here is my pocket. Looks like they actually used that French curve when they created this pocket. There's that pocket. Then I can come back in later and say, well, here's where my pocket bag is gonna be. I could measure it from there, or I can make up my own, but the fit of everything else will be the same. But here's the front pant of this pair of shorts that I own. So if I loved this pair of shorts and I wore them out, well, I can make myself another pair now. Here's my center front. Here's my grain line, here's my hem. I can just take a whole bunch of measurements for finishing now, but the actual shape of the crotch and everything is all here. Transferring a pattern can be as easy as that. So oftentimes with pants, getting this curve is really hard to create it from scratch. So sometimes it's nice to start with a pair of pants where you know the crotch curve is already good, snag the pattern, and then just develop everything else out afterwards. So, this pair of pants also happens to have a gusset right there. Notice that it's just a really, really long rectangle. So just measure it and draft that piece separately. I don't have to rub this off because I can tell that it's a rectangle. So I'll just go by measurements instead. So that's kind of the idea with rubbing off too, is being smart about which pieces that you need to snag with a tracing wheel and which pieces really are just big rectangles. I don't need to snag the belt loops. I know that's just a long rectangular piece. I don't need to snag this piece because that's just a long rectangle. This pocket, I don't need to trace that, because it's just based on a rectangle. I can measure that pretty easily. But anything that has curves or slight curves, like the yoke or this back crotch, any of those are all pieces that I would snag. On shirts, like the armhole, make sure that the arm, like the sleeve, you can't even really see that very well perhaps, but make sure I can see that armhole bell curve right here. The rest of the shirt can be wrinkled, that's fine. Just make sure that you get that perfect bell curve. Make sure the pattern piece you're wanting is perfectly flat. The sleeve, you can flip it on that fold to get it all transferred over. So honestly, here, I'll just bring you up really quick and talk to you this way. Honestly, the rubbing off is really easy, but it gets easier as you do it. So, and every garment is different. every single garment is different. So you have to approach each garment. There's not a list of rules that I say, first do this, second do this. I've already given you the rules for that. Basically, it's the whole make sure your pattern piece is perfectly flat that you want to snag, and then trace it off. And if it at all possible for you to draft it because it's a basic enough shape, then draft it. And there you go. That's all you got to do. That's it for today. If you would like to get a leg up on next week, and you do want to have a pair of pants that you've already snagged the pattern off of, that could be grand. Next week I will show you how to draft the pant pattern from scratch. There are 2 different patterns that we'll look at. We'll look at a trouser pattern, and we'll also look at a jean pattern. We'll look at them. I might only show you how to do one and let you figure out the other one from the book. But yeah, have a great week. One more week and then it's Thanksgiving break. So, have a good day.